Transportation. We depend on it to get from place to place, yet we rarely think about its environmental impact.
In 2019, Academy-funded air travel covered 4,791,383 miles and emitted 2,300 megatons of carbon dioxide. It represented 15.55% of the Academy's total emissions.
Daily commuting for students, staff, and faculty represented 11.6% of total emissions.
How can we all be more conscious of how we travel? How can we each help the environment even in a small way?
Academy departments such as the Office of Institutional Advancement often send representatives across the country or the world.
To find out more, we chose to interview Mr. Hayes. All right, so our first question is, how often do you personally travel for Academy-related affairs?
So for my work in particular, I would say I travel on average 4 to 5 times a month off campus, primarily to Boston, Washington, D.C., and then Indiana and Louisville, Kentucky.
Have you ever tallied the number of hours the Office of Institutional Advancement representatives spend in the air?
Not to my knowledge. I believe that relative to my peers, my travel might be, at least in terms of days on the road, smaller than that of my peers, in part because of where I'm traveling to. For instance, I have a colleague who's in California now, and her entire Monday is committed to travel, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday she's visiting with alumni, and then Friday she's home. But it's a good question. I don't actually know if we've tracked that statistic.
Okay, and when planning development events, does the office consider the transportation required?
Yeah, so there are school policies around travel, both in terms of booking travel, how far in advance, trying to book the most ideal rates, the shortest duration of time in the air. For me, I try to schedule my meetings in close proximity so that I don't need to rent a car. And for the most part, I can walk to my meetings once I'm in that city, or I can take an Uber or taxi if necessary.
Do you believe that there is any way for the office to reduce the amount of air travel?
I do think so. So there are often times when members of the department are traveling to the same location, potentially for a regional event. And sometimes the office does a good job of coordinating travel. I would say there are opportunities for colleagues to travel together and to be more efficient. For instance, you may have 3 people traveling to New York City for a regional event. You might have one person who drives, you might have one person who takes the train, and you might have another person who flies. All sort of based on their own personal schedule.
Okay, and then last one, could you just walk us through the process of taking an Academy-funded trip? So do you get sent on trips, or do you initiate them, sort of organize them yourself, which you sort of already answered?
Sure, so it's a little bit of both. I would say my role in particular, and within the Office of Major Gifts, it's all outreach from this office. Mm-hmm. So we're determining who we go see, when we go see them. I would say other departments within institutional advancement are traveling to events that have been planned and acting as representatives of the school. So they have less control over their schedule, whereas I have, sort of ultimate control over my schedule, when I fly, where I fly to, and who I'm seeing when I'm on the road.
Are you aware that Academy-funded air travel constitutes 15% of the school's emissions?
I'm not aware of that.
Do you think is that like surprising to you?
No, based on how much travel, I would say sort of the Office of Institutional Advancement and the admissions office does, and having been exposed to both, I think that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But no, the number doesn't really shock me.
Mm-hmm.
The average one-way commute for staff and faculty is 10.29 miles.
What percentage of Exeter's footprint would you guess is due to transportation?
Oh my gosh, I have absolutely no idea. Is that an acceptable answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you aware that 15% of Exeter's emissions are due to air travel?
No, I was not aware. I feel like I would like it to be lower.
What does a typical day of transportation look like for you?
I typically walk my daughter to school unless it's really cold, then I drive, and I only drive our school's like around the corner, so it's not even a half mile round trip. And then I go to the gym, and so I'll drive to the gym and then walk to lunch and back, and then drive home after practice. So
How often do you take Academy-funded transportation?
let's see, I typically go to a conference in the winter, track in the spring for nationals will fly, institutional advancement trip in April or March that I'll be going to, late March.
Could you walk us through the process of taking an Academy-funded trip? Do you take commercial or private airplanes?
Commercial.
And is there any dialogue among faculty about the environmental impact of transportation?
Not that I've had.
The average one-way commute for day students is 9.73 miles. How much would you guess student transportation contributes to the overall emissions at PEA?
I think it depends on how far you live from campus. For example, I live about 30 miles from campus, so I think kids who live maybe in Massachusetts or in Portsmouth who have a longer drive are contributing more, as opposed to people who live in like Exeter, like Ada only lives.
Yeah, I live about 4 minutes away from campus, so my drive's definitely not as bad as someone like Bethany, but altogether, when you add it all up, I think it definitely does contribute to our emissions, especially like students who live like across the country or out of the country. Emissions for them to fly to Exeter definitely contributes to that too.
Okay. What does a typical day of commuting look like for you, and what did it look like before you got your driver's license?
Before I got my driver's license, I definitely wasn't leaving campus as frequently. It was, I got here, I stayed through the day, and then my parents picked me up at the end of the day. But now that I have my license, I'll leave maybe 6 times a day to go get food, go home and get something. So it's definitely increased my emissions since I've gotten my license because of how frequent I leave campus.
Okay. Have you ever considered or participated in carpool?
Personally, no, only because I live so close. I mean, there's other day students who live just as close as me, but I don't feel the need to carpool, I guess, because of how frequently I leave. If I had to be waiting on someone else to also want to leave campus.
There's no one that's a day student that lives in my town or in my area. The closest is Newburyport, I think, and that probably would just end up being really inefficient and like not possible for our parents.
Okay, and what ideas do you think could plausibly reduce student transportation, if any?
I feel like a lot of the time day students leave campus to either go get food or to sleep, and there's been a lot of talk on campus about bringing in housing or rooms on campus for day students to be able to stay in throughout the day, somewhere to sleep, and I think that definitely could help because you have less reason for day students to need to leave throughout the day.
As seen by teachers, students, and staff, we can all be doing something more to think about minimizing our transportation where possible.
And urging the administration to be more mindful of transportation's environmental impact.